Welcome back to Nature Labs and our coverage of the 2025 Canadian federal election. Now, as some of you know, I'm originally from British Columbia, though I live in Alberta now, and I'm long accustomed to federal elections being decided before the polls close in my home province. That's just one of the factors that drives this concept of what's called Western alienation, a sense that those in the West don't get to have a significant enough say in who gets to form our government federally and who gets to make decisions on behalf of all of us across the country. Now, in tonight's election, we expect that won't necessarily be the case. We think the West will have a major say in the outcome of the election. Now, they might not get to decide who gets to form government, but they'll probably have a big say in deciding if one government or another gets to form a majority or a minority. That's important. But of course, for some in the West, it won't be important enough. Now, historically in Canada, elections have often pivoted around the divide between English and French, and whether enough Canadian voters are seen to respect Quebec values and independence in the context of Canada, of course, and that's often determined electoral outcomes. But increasingly in elections, and tonight we think it'll be even more pronounced, is the idea of Western alienation and how it's giving rise to a sense of a separatist movement in the Western Prairie provinces. Now, we've talked about this at length in Nature Labs, so we won't belabor the point tonight, but it is an issue worth looking at. It's how does the sense of Western alienation, even a growing desire for separation in Saskatchewan and Alberta amongst a segment of the population, how does that play out in tonight's election, and how do they are their perceptions enhanced or impacted by the results of the campaign tonight? Now, we don't think that there'll be a clean sweep by one party or another in the Prairie West. But what's important to look at tonight is not just the overall outcome of the election in terms of seat count and majority or minority government, but it's also important to look at popular votes. Because you can potentially win the popular vote in Canada, but not actually get the chance to form government. In our last two elections, the Conservatives, in fact, have won the national popular vote, but they have not been able to have what we call an efficient vote to allows them to form government. That means they're running up the score totals basically in ridings in Alberta and Saskatchewan predominantly, where they're getting, say, 60-80% of the votes in specific ridings there. But they're not getting the kind of votes they need in the plurality of ridings across the country. Because again, I can't emphasize this enough. In Canada, we don't vote for our Prime Minister, we vote for our local candidates. And the party that has the most representatives in the House of Commons gets to form government. So voter efficiency, where that popular vote breaks down across the country, ultimately determine who gets to form government, no matter who wins that popular vote. Which is not dissimilar from America, I guess, because popular vote doesn't determine who gets to form the presidency either, but I digress. In this election, what we want to see is how the popular vote breaks out, who wins it, of course, but specifically, what does the vote look like in Saskatchewan and Alberta? Now, we talked about earlier, it's possible that changing demographics mean the Liberals can gain a foothold in Saskatchewan and can even pick up seats in Alberta. But the underlying numbers are going to be interesting in the Conservative strongholds. Does their vote total increase in those ridings? Is that driving their overall popularity in the national popular vote? Because that's going to give us a window into how strong a sentiment there is in Western Canada that the Liberals don't have the best intentions for those regions. And again, that's important because we're seeing this growing Western separation movement take hold in Alberta specifically, but also in parts of Saskatchewan and northeastern British Columbia. And tonight will give us an indication of how strongly that vote sticks with Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, how much of it's diluted, maybe with sort of the leadership of Mark Carney and the Liberal Party. And that will give us a window into what the landscape looks like going forward for whoever gets to form government after the election tonight. The Quebec issue, the issues of French versus English, that's not going to go away either. But increasingly, this issue of Western alienation, the sentiment that the federal government and the Liberal Party particularly don't respect Western jurisdiction, Western values, and are stifling, say, resource extraction, which is so central to not only the economy, but the value set of those who live in Alberta and Saskatchewan. That's going to be a major issue for whoever forms the next government, for whoever is sworn in as our next Prime Minister. And we'll get a sense tonight of how deeply rooted that sentiment is by looking at the popular vote. And that's one thing that we'll be looking at and we'll break out for you as it comes in tonight and, of course, in the days to come as recounts and final tallies are made. But that's one issue to look at tonight. And as of course we always discuss on Nature Labs, the other part of that, of course, is the urban-rural dynamic. How pronounced is that all across the country? Do we see urban ridings staying liberal? Do we see rural ridings breaking for the Conservatives? Do we see a starker divide between two parties, rather than in the past elections where we've had this sort of diversity of other smaller parties like the NDP or the Bloc Québécois? So how does that come out to play tonight? How pronounced and stark is that divide between rural and urban? And equally, to some degree, how stark is the divide between the North and the South, Indigenous and non-Indigenous? That will play out in terms of the territories and some northern ridings in, say, Saskatchewan. So those are a couple of issues to look at tonight, because it's not just about who gets to form government, but it's how divided or united is our nation going into a moment of crisis where we have to defend our sovereignty, figure out a way to grow our economy, and of course still address all of those issues like the environment that didn't just go away overnight.